everyone. We are excited to have you all join us. My name is Joseph Porteous. I use he, they pronouns. I serve as Executive Director of Stonewall Columbus. This evening, we are excited to be joined by our board member, a local amazing person, and lawyer, Allison Harrison. And I'll let Allison introduce herself here in a moment, but I just want to give a little context to tonight's conversation. And knowing that when we initially came to this conversation, we were looking at something that may be totally different. So tonight we are engaging in what we call marriage equality and beyond, preparing for what's post the Kim Davis decision for LGBT community plus community and protecting our rights. So we're thinking about the fact that initially we were thinking we're going to be talking tonight about if the Supreme Court takes up Kim Davis's petition, what would happen? But we found out this morning that that did not happen, right? So today the Supreme Court declined to hear Kim Davis petition, leaving Obergefell versus Hodges and the right to marry intact. While that brings relief to so many, it also reminds us that equality requires constant protection, right? Not just one moment of paying attention, but something we have to continually always look for. And so we're excited to be able to sit tonight again with Allison and talk about what comes next for LGBTQ rights and how our community, the LGBT community, can stay proactive in safeguarding our futures. So we've got a couple of prepared questions. We've got Allison here to sort of play off of any conversation and questions that we get here. I am not a lawyer. I play one on TV sometimes. No, just joking. As a kid, my mom always said, you should maybe go to become a lawyer because I was so defensive, right? Like I could defend any argument. Why should I have more cookies before bedtime? I don't think my mom and I ever talked about why I should get married as a gay guy, but here we are, right? Today I'm married with my partner and have a child. And I think that's something we as LGBTQ folks, we don't know what our future will look like, but we want to have all the options and opportunities that our counterparts have. And that's part of what this conversation is about. So Allison, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And even before that, thank you for the work that you do in the community. And hopefully people will learn a little bit more about you as you introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, thank you, Denzel, for having me. I appreciate it. I know this was a thing in the news that people were really nervous and scared about. And also because understanding how the Supreme Court works and doesn't work is also just a little bit of a mystery to folks who aren't in the legal profession. Even those of us who are in the legal profession, it sometimes feels like a mystery too. Anyhow, I'm Allison Harrison. I am the owner of ALH Law Group. We are an estate planning and business litigation firm in Columbus, Ohio. With a location also in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But we really focus on supporting the LGBTQ community, doing name and gender change, marker changes, guiding people through that legal process, and ensuring LGBTQ couples have their rights protected and have an affirming estate plan. Because as we'll get into, I'm certain in these conversations, estate planning has a very strong overlap with marriage equality and protecting the rights that come along with marriage.
Wonderful. I didn't know that you all were out of state as well. Look at that. That's awesome. Protecting us everywhere. So
But
that's actually, it's actually really great to see that expansion and growth, and also to think about how that's, more affirming support for people outside of just the area of Columbus, the state of Ohio. So again, as I started off at the beginning, thank you so much for the work that you do. So as you said, it really is sort of this interesting thing. Who understands SCOTUS? I mean, I didn't go to law school. I didn't. I might have dated a lawyer or two. Actually, I did. I did. One who wanted to go on to SCOTUS, and we'll see if that happens one day. But I think let's start with the very first question and grounding with us, right? Like, can you explain what happened with Kim Davis's case, or I say petition, because it wasn't a case or not. It was a petition. But what happened with the petition, and why today's sort of decision matters?
yeah, so I think this is going to be like a little bit of how the court systems work 101, because that's where it gets confusing. So we have trial courts. So Kim Davis brought a suit in a federal district court in Kentucky contesting fines that were levied by the couple who requested to get married, and she refused to issue their permit. They had filed suit. This actually happened. They filed suit at the trial court level, seeking to hold her responsible for emotional distress and damages related to denying their certificate. They were successful. The court found that Kim Davis violated Obergefell's decision, the law of the land, and had damages. Well, Kim Davis appealed that to the appellate court, or the circuit court, to the Sixth Circuit, which governs like Ohio, Kentucky, and a couple other states, and said no, the trial court got it wrong. And so she appealed that. The Sixth Circuit said, no, they didn't get it wrong, and upheld the lower court. Then Kim said, well, I still think everyone's wrong, and requested certiorari to the Supreme Court. Well, you have a right of an appeal at the circuit level, but you don't have an automatic right of appeal for most cases at the Supreme Court. And so the request for certiorari is like, please hear my case. And so the Supreme Court is in this unique position where they get to decide whether or not to hear cases. They don't have to. When we listen to like NPR and in the news, we'll say like the Supreme Court punted, like they passed on hearing the case because they either don't want to tackle that issue right now, or it's not the right case to address the issue. And so what happened today through the announcement is they denied cert, which means they're not going to hear the case. And what happened at the Sixth Circuit remains at the Sixth Circuit. And so while that's not a national implication, basically what the circuit court did, the lower court did was say, we're not changing the status quo. Like gay marriage is still the law of the land, Obergefell is still intact. And the other piece of this case, which I think is has larger implications and hasn't been talked about quite as much, is in that we said that if you work for the government, you cannot have your religious freedoms trump what the law of the land is, because her whole
Mhm.
thing was, I am so religious that this violates my religious liberty. And so we have had courts say, that's great, you can express those outside of being a government employee.
So much to unpack. I think I'm sweating. I literally think I'm sweating. No, but I
Yeah.
mean, but everyone's been sweating, right? I mean, I think when this news came in like August, right, July, August, and we're all like, what in the world is Kim doing again, right? And we contextualize that in terms of what is she doing again, right? Because Kim was the person who brought this to us so
The
many moons
fact
ago.
that we know her name so well in the community, I feel like is emblematic of how much of a troublemaker she is.
And I mean, and I don't want to be someone who's going to say she's going to have a pop cultural name like, oh, you're being such a Kim, but right, like I think this is that moment when we think about it, and you've sort of already unpacked some of the things it's been interesting to think that it went from this level to this level to this level, and at the top level they said, whoa, 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 we're punting. Or
Mhm.
as you said, what you say, was that the word? I look
Yeah,
football. I'm not a
yes,
football.
yes. It was a football word, punting.
Right. And so and that's an amazing thing because I think there's a couple of things we have to think about as we unpack right what's happening here. Right. You mentioned it may not be the right time or the right case, so they may not have felt comfortable to take it. Right. And so that means it may not have fully gone away. Right. But I
Yeah.
think in this moment, that also helps us unpack some things, right? Do we think that the Supreme Court is sort of changing attitudes toward LGBT equality, or are they just saying, "Hey, we're respecting the law of the land," and so at this moment we're going to punt because there might be some things there, and there are other things we have to unpack, right? Because we're going to talk about the passport issue a little bit, but we're going to stick with marriage for a moment. We're going to come back to passport, but I mean, I think to me, it's like, yeah, like, was it the case? Was it the moment? Like, what do we think it was that allowed the Supreme Court to say, you know what, at this moment, we are going to pause or punt?
I think some of it has to do with the case. A lot of it, like it's when I saw that she had requested cert, I was like, I don't know that that's the right. If I was on the other side, way
Mm.
to get this to the Supreme Court, it certainly was the fastest way to get
Right.
this at a national level. Because right, what we've seen with other cases, like when Roe fell, the folks who wanted to overturn Roe were searching for the right
First, that's
case to
right.
do it,
Mm.
right? And Kim Davis wasn't. We weren't. No one was. I don't think searching for that case. It just happened because 10 years ago, Obergefell happened, and so I think that's part of it. I also a little bit the Supreme Court, while they're not supposed to on these types of cases get the pulse of the country, I do feel like that may have some impact on it. Um,
Mm.
now, it's always a juxtaposition because we see all these things coming from the shadow docket, which we'll talk about with passports, that are contrary to that. But the shadow docket has a very different role in how things roll out.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I think it is a little bit of sort of the court SCOTUS, right? Like uh, feeling the essence of what's happening in the community. More so than before, I think we probably did not talk about SCOTUS's belief that their legacy is X, Y, and Z. And I think what I've seen more and more over these last couple of years is that we talk about SCOTUS and we talk about this legacy that each individual member has to consider, right? And we think about Justice Roberts, and everyone's always like, well, that's a vacillator because he's got these young kids and he's got to think about these things, and and here is Sotomayor and what she's got to do. And so I think that's also interesting to think about sort of the cultural climate, that as much as our legislative system should not be tied to the climate of culture, it's sort of pervasive, right? It's sort of pervasive in that these are people who also, again, have home lives, and they wonder what their kids might say. Like, Dad, I can't believe you did that. Like, you literally tried to take away marriage from my best friend. Like, I couldn't imagine like my young child, who, what, I don't know what generation she is, like a zillennial, I don't know, like a little bit,
I
what,
don't know.
right?
After millennial, I don't know the generations.
But also there has to be, I believe, again, different from before, just the society of how we live and how cultural mores are sort of becoming infused in decisions and actions and moments.
I mean, I think maybe a little, the other piece of that is very just pragmatic. The Supreme
Mm,
Court doesn't like to overturn itself quickly. Right? When
mm,
we look at cases that get overturned, there's usually a much larger gap in time because
time.
you get different justices who are approaching it
Yes.
differently. The
Yeah.
makeup of this court today versus the makeup of the court 10 years ago, yes, it's different, but we still have a number of folks that were on the court 10 years ago on the court today.
Mm,
And
mm,
so
mm.
I also think just not enough time has elapsed for them to want
Yeah.
to, for the court to want to revisit in a
Yeah.
drastically different way.
So I appreciate the language used because I love pragmatism. I'm a pragmatic person. A friend of mine called me that many years ago, and often people don't like that, but I was like, I'm gonna lean into that. Pragmatism means something important, and so I think that's a notion of strategy. So as we turn back to the notion of, right, like in this moment, right, SCOTUS has said this may not be the right thing. Being pragmatic as pragmatic can be, right? Like out of the justices, we all said, let's just hold, right? Like
Yeah.
culturally, momentarily, all the things, which I think is really, really sort of poignant and important for us to think about. So this first thing is that today's decision doesn't necessarily sort of say it's the end of the road. It can mean that the justices were being pragmatic, that timing wasn't correct, and that we may have this battle come up again. So I love
Yeah.
that. So this is not a sort of a be reassured moment. This is just a temporary reprieve from what may potentially happen in the future. Correct?
I think so. I mean, the way
Yeah.
that I have framed it for me, my team, kind of my social is this is a minute for the community to take a deep breath, let our shoulders drop just a little bit, and get recharged because the fight's not over. I don't know
Yeah.
that the fight's ever going to be over, but this is a minute to like fill your battery, fill your cup.
Perfect. I love that. We're gonna the essence of that language is something I lean into, right? Like I often talk about how, and I'll talk about the pandemic because it's still just semi-recent to me, right? But the quiet of the pandemic allowed us to think differently about how we do things, at least at Stonewall. And I think sort of the same moment, the reprieve of the busyness of the moment, the fighting, the constant fighting, much like the passport conversation we'll have momentarily,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like that this moment allows us to breathe, but doesn't say step away or step back. It says take the time, enjoy the sort of semi-win, but also
Mhm.
no, we're not done yet. So I think that's great. So even for I think that's a space we can sort of go to, right? Like there's still necessity for us as couples, as families, as individuals to think about steps that we need to do to protect ourselves, right? So let's start with sort of couples because that's really where this conversation started about
Right.
was what do we do to protect our marriage, right? Like I did the crazy thing. I got married, so yeah, right? Like I don't want to be a statistic, um, right? Like in the future, right? But here we are, right? Like what steps can couples, right? And in a very high level, because we'll go to a little deeper, but like what steps are there right now to protect themselves legally, right? Like yes, in this moment, I would say if you're an unmarried couple, get married if you want to some things, but like are there steps right now that we should be thinking about at the highest level to protect those
Yeah.
unions that we have?
So when we think about getting married, it's a contractual relationship. There's a religious
Mm,
component if that's your thing. If it's not, it doesn't have to be, right? But it is a contractual relationship between two people that says we're going to blend a lot of things. And so like
mm,
the major things that come with marriage are a healthcare power of attorney, meaning you can make healthcare decisions for your husband. The law says you are the person. If your husband can't make decisions, you get to. You get inheritance rights, meaning if I die before my wife, she would get my things
mm,
because she's my spouse. Um, because that's a default rules. There are, access to hospitals. Most hospitals have policies. They're not law, but they're policies that say spouses
Mm,
have right of visitation. And they usually default to what's the definition of spouse by state law. And so those are, there's some other things. There's government benefits, 401k, some of those rights, but largely those are all contractual. And so things that
mm,
couples can do right now are get estate plans, right? When we talk about
mm,
recreating the rights of marriage, we talk about making sure you have healthcare power of attorney, financial power of attorney, so you can make financial decisions for one another if you can't. If you have kids, looking at making sure that they're properly adopted, and so no one can challenge parentage. Nomination of guardianship. This one I think is an interesting one, which is says
mm, mm.
if you have dementia or not able to take care of yourself, right? Britney Spears is the quintessential person who's had a guardianship at a younger age. Who is that person that's going to take care of you? Because we want to ensure that it is not someone who has ill will towards you and is like,
Correct.
I'm gonna get guardianship and put you in conversion therapy. We certainly don't want that. And so pre-nominating a guardian says, if I ever need it, I have,
Mm,
while I'm sane, selected this person. And then healthcare visitation authorizations, where well, marriage right now is safe. What I could see happening are healthcare systems that are in more conservative places saying, well, we don't recognize your marriage. We're not a government entity. We're a Catholic based or Lutheran based. Or if you look at hospitals, so many of them are saint, blah, blah, blah. Um, and so having that says, okay, well, if you don't want to honor my marriage, here's this piece of paper that says under Medicare and Medicaid, you have to let me
you
in.
have to.
Right. Otherwise, I'm going to call and really jeopardize a lot of your funding because most
Mm,
hospitals get funding from Medicare and Medicaid. And so
mm.
those are kind of the basic things to recreate the protections of marriage.
So, I think I'm probably sure I've heard this before, but tonight I'm paying attention and I love that you said it. Recreate the rights of marriage. And marriage again is a loaded word, but in terminology, we know what marriage means here in the US and what we mean here, right? Like that legal
Mhm.
unification of one individual to together, right? And so recreate the rights of marriage. Like that is um hmm, I'm trying to sit with that, but that's a powerful thing when we think about what automatically comes when you say, I do. I choose this
Mhm.
person. And I'm here on vacation in this hotel room. I won't say where we are. The blinds are not as lovely as we like them to be, but I want to point out a moment of like recreates the rights of marriage. So this is the first time that my husband and I have traveled, and we rented a car. And I knew the rights of marriage in the back of my mind because I was ready to just throw elbows and like get all frumpity with this person. And he's all nervous. He's like, "Well, baby, like they need your license and they need all this stuff." I said, we're married. He said, what? I said, yeah, we're married. We walk up to the counter, right? And the person says, oh, and he's like, well, I need your light. I said, no, no. I said, we're married. They says, oh, well, if you're married, go right ahead. No questions, nothing, no, not a
Yeah.
question. I don't need to see your driver's license. If you're on the same insurance, no, it just says you're married, go ahead. And I think that's the beautiful thing is, right? Like we have to recreate these things that just automatically come from someone saying I do and signing a piece of paper. I'm as pragmatic as I am, right? Like I also believe in redundancies, and so some of these things I think are also just human redundancies that we as people should think about, right? Like, is there something extra, especially as queer folks, that we should be thinking about? And so when we think about medical power of attorney, right, or having living trust or wills, these are things that we should really just think about naturally. I think. I don't know what your thoughts
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
there.
No, I think absolutely. I mean, it does gay, straight, does I don't think it matters. We should be thinking about them, but especially for folks who come from a not affirming family. Like that is like one, marriages are always like I feel like right now are in jeopardy, right? We got to pass on this case, but who knows what comes next. But additionally, we also have family members who may not be amazingly supportive. And what no one wants is to have that family member who's not supportive show up in the hospital and challenge your marriage and say, yeah, 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 I know that they're married, or like,
But,
yeah, 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 I know they think they're married, but they're not. I'm
but,
stepping in. But it's the but. And so
yeah.
by having these documents, you can have that person challenged, but you have the backup plan. And so you're just like, great, go away for so many reasons and a lot more choice words. I'm certain of it. But here's the document that says I am his person or I am her person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And for our wonderful community that's in the the poly community, that's a different thing to
Different.
unpack on how to
Mhm.
protect and have those documentations. But there are ways to do it
To do
so
them.
that your relationships on all relationships are honored because you don't have a marriage, you have a multi-partner
So,
relationship.
this is the thing that I think about, right? Like the pragmatist in me, the redundancies, all the things, right? We think about, and we're located in Columbus, Ohio, and we're located in the operative word here is Ohio, right? But we know sort of the systems that can shift and change, right? My partner is from Indiana, right? Like that's like
A redder state,
a
yes.
redder state, right? And some of these things that you talk about are true, right? Like, I mean, I love my partner's family, and I don't believe that would ever be a consideration. But right, other people, there are others who are like, "What is this?" And so, what happens, right? When we think about sort of these redundancies when we get married in one state, and then someone says, "Well, we're not recognizing your marriage in another state." Are there things that we could put in place there, right? You all have firms now in other states,
We
right? Like
do.
that, like this is important to think about. Like, what is what happens outside of Ohio? Like when I came to Florida, I was like, I'm look, you're gonna recognize my marriage. Give me my car.
I mean,
Great, but what
the,
else?
the the good thing that we have right now, right? Obergefell still is law of the land, and so all states have to recognize our marriage. Questions on Texas on the whole, we don't have to do marriages, but that's a different issue. And so we have that. We also have the Respect for Marriage Act that codifies Obergefell as well. So like
Perfect. Yeah.
currently, we don't have that state by state issues like we did back in 2015 before Obergefell,
Mm,
where it's like you can be married in New York but not in Ohio.
not in Ohio. Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't have that. But if you have, so almost every state has a standardized form for a healthcare power of attorney and a financial
Mm,
power of attorney. And if folks don't have those and are thinking, oh gosh, like this whole estate planning sounds great, but I don't have the finances for it, those two, you can Google them, Ohio
mm,
Standard Healthcare Power of Attorney, and you can find it.
mm,
And the Ohio State Bar Association put one together. It's amazing and has clear
mm,
instructions. So like
mm,
follow that or meet with
mm,
a planner, but those are like kind of like at the very basic level protections so you can go to the hospital and see each other. And also, very interesting fact, I would be remiss if I didn't say it. The way we got to marriage equality is through estate planning. If you think about Edie Windsor, her whole thing was she was getting hammered with estate taxes because her wife died. And so she challenged based on inheritance, right? Like that is step one. And then Obergefell was being able to be buried next to each other and challenging the provision that said they weren't married, even though they were married in a state that recognized same-sex marriage. And so like to me, that is like the fascinating part of like, how do we protect ourselves? It's through estate planning. How did we get a marriage equality? Through estate planning.
And I appreciate, thank you so much for, because I think that's something, history 101, LGBTQ history 101, right?
Mhm.
Like people always talk about Jim Obergefell, we love Jim, but we don't always often mention Edie Windsor, right? And I think that's the important thing to also remember that these were sort of together in the same moment, and Edie was part of this plaintiff and the cases and all the things that are happening. And I think that the important thing here is exactly what you're saying, right? Like this is about estate planning. I also believe being pragmatic, right? This is what these people were doing. They were being pragmatic about their relationships and said, in order for us to ensure and enshrine our love, our relationships, this commitment to each other, we're going to take all the steps that we can, right? So that when the challenges come, we're prepared. And what
Yeah.
happened? The challenges came. And that's how
And
we
they
move marriage forward, right? Like that's so. I appreciate you bringing up Edie because that also, sort of the bigger context, right? It wasn't just one; it was multitudes of saying we are trying to prepare because we know this challenge is coming, and we're just going to follow all the steps that you, as a country, have told us that we should take. And now, here we are. Here we are. So I think that's a great thing. So, we keep talking about it, right? We don't in this moment. We're lucky, thankful. Um, and we think about sort of what it may happen in the future. And so having a healthcare power of attorney, having these things planned out if something changes in the future. But the reality, what we're also seeing is that people are leaving states, right? We mentioned Texas, we mentioned Ohio, we mentioned Indiana, right? People are uprooting their families, their lives, their loved ones from state to state to find havens where they can feel comfortable, where they can feel safe, for a multitude of reasons, right? They've got gender affirming care that they want to exist within. They want to see their families sort of seeing them. And so I think, again, these steps that you're mentioning, when you move from state to state, yes, you may be married here, but sometimes this added layer, again, just can be another protection moment for you as you decide in this very tumultuous time to change one state to the next.
Also, I think while you find community, I was at a national conference where there was a
Mm,
bunch of estate planners in the LGBTQ space, and we talked about how important the community aspect is to the LGBTQ folks. And as folks are moving out of state, you don't yet have that um, safe space or the people that you know and trust and can help you navigate things like where do you find this doctor that provides gender affirming care, or who's the lawyer you use, or all of those things that you may take for granted now because you're like, oh, I'm here, I'm rooted, I know. And so having some at least basic levels of protections while you're finding that community and you're finding those safe spaces, I think is incredibly important because you don't necessarily know. Paths are always paved with good intentions, but just because you move to another state doesn't always mean grass is greener, at least from the beginning. You might
from the
find that,
beginning.
yeah, you may find the nice patch of grass after you've been there for a while and found
Yeah.
community, but it takes a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. Well, lucky thing again, not a plug for your firm. However, you're in multiple states. And so
Yeah,
if
yeah,
if
yeah.
you need some resources, where was that again? Ohio, did you say Wisconsin?
No, we're Ohio, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nebraska.
Oh,
We have
oh, Nebraska.
physical locations in Ohio and Minnesota.
Oh, I dated someone from Chadron, Nebraska once. That's a side note. Next time we get together and talk. Next time we get together
Okay,
and talk.
yeah.
So all right, okay. So we talked about a marriage equality in the future, other states, right? I crafted a statement in August, and I was so like sort of prepared for what was going to come down the pike because I was like, they're coming after marriage. What are we going to do? How do we prepare ourselves? Right? And I started saying to my friends, the reality is, I would say to you, if you're thinking about getting married, go ahead and do it now if you're thinking of doing it the next year at the time, right? But
Right.
now, what are your thoughts? Like, do you think people should rush out and do it still? I mean, again, everyone should make their own decision, like caveat and clause, right? But is there still like, is there urgency like that? The feeling I'm married, at least, well, well, not married. I performed the ceremony of close friends in
Yeah.
October because of this urgency that we were being felt. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think to me, marriage is so much more than all the contractual rights. Like when I got
Mm,
married to my wife, it's because I loved her and I wanted our families to know that she is my
mm,
person, she is who I am choosing. And so it was a much more personal decision, but we are also pragmatists. And so, I think anyone who's going into a marriage and maybe speeding up how they're getting married, because I think that's what you're
mm,
talking about is
mm,
we're going to do it eventually, but we're going to speed it up. Look at doing a prenup. I'm a lawyer, right? I plan for the worst. And so, like,
mm,
I don't think it's the act of getting a prenup that's important. I think it's the act of having a conversation about the things that lead to divorce, right? A prenup,
mm,
you talk about finances and what are your philosophies on finances. When you're in that lovey-dovey stage, I love you so much. No one's talking about like, what's your philosophy on investing, right? Like, I mean, maybe a few people are, but that's not really what's happening. And so the act of like having those conversations, which is usually the basis of a prenuptial agreement, I think is a must. And then
mm,
after you have those conversations, if you're still like, heck yes, I want to marry this person, then great, go get married. You can do
mm,
it quicker than you would otherwise, or go to the courthouse, get married. So you have the certificate and then do
mm,
a wedding later. I know a number of folks who are like, we're going to go quietly get married. So we know we're married. And then we're going to throw the big ceremony later. I think that's fine,
mm.
but don't skip the steps to a solid marriage. Um, of making sure you're aligned on the things that are important.
Uh, wow. I mean, it's just well, and it's sort of like you don't want to tell people what, but also yes, right? Like I think as someone of the clergy, they might say, right? Like one of the things that you do talk about, right, is sort of these pre-conversations about marriage, right? Like we believe there should be conversations about the commitment and what you're getting into, and so there's something beautiful in the idea that even outside of marriage and all the things that we're looking for in healthcare for ourselves individually or places we're going to buy a home, we should pause, take a moment, be pragmatic, and map it out, right? That's really what the
Yeah.
conversation to me is about, right? Like, because if we're thinking about buying a home, I mean, I don't just wake up tomorrow and say, "Hey, let's go buy the house." It's like, well, right, right. It's pragmatism and thinking about, okay, this is the house that I want. This looks great. Can I do this? Can I do this? And I map out a thing. And I think that is an important reflection in this moment, right? As we continue to to feel the headwinds of challenges against LGBTQ identities and the struggles that we're seeing, it's sort of saying, hey, take a moment, take a pause. We can be thoughtful and pragmatic about how we move forward and map it out, right? So before you take the next step, map it out. And if the next step still says this is the way I want to go, then go for it, right? Like go for it. And so I appreciate, so I lean into that. And I think that's a great way for us to think about sort of how someone else can make a decision about whether or not she get married today or tomorrow. Because we're not telling you to get married today or tomorrow, but we're saying map it out, right? Like, and if all the things still say yes and point to yes, that seems like a okay. Let's get her done in
Yeah,
a way.
no, one of my good friends is a prenup attorney, and he has a book out that's called Prenup Prescription. And it's basically
Mm,
the list of conversations you should have before you get married. And so to me, like, I don't know, that's the best gift you can give is having conversations with folks. And that's I apply this to estate planning as well. When we do estate plans, people are like, well, I'm not going to tell so and so that they're the beneficiary. Why not? They need to know to like take care of you, but also when you die, they need to know to go do something.
something, yeah, yeah.
And so maybe I just live transparency too much, and that's my motto. But
It's a good it's this I will say I will lean into and say this is direction. People live transparently because it's going to make it easier for everyone. That part
yeah,
that part I will lean into. So all right, so we're talking about sort of all of these different things, and I think we talked about the possibility of the future, what may happen if marriage is overturned. We talked about sort of the feeling and litmus test of like socialization of justices and where we are. But I think I want to, for a moment, talk a little bit about, we started talking about passports, right? But
yeah,
are there what is it? I think this year 630. I could be wrong. I have to go look. Bills that the ACLU are tracking, and they have done this for the last several years, and we're so thankful for them that are anti-LGBTQ, right?
yeah.
Do we think there are any other sort of things right now, pending laws, legislation that could either strengthen or threaten our rights at the state level? Like, are there things like in the works that we should be aware of? If you're aware, right? Like, we just had the
Yeah,
passport conversation, and that's still one that's hot to me because I'm like, and we could talk a little bit about that as well. But are there other things that we should be thinking about or aware of? I'm not sure.
I don't know if you felt this.
Mm,
I think leading up to the election and inauguration, and like maybe the first month or two, it was really hot in the press and every in politics of anti-LGBTQ.
mhm.
Either I have gone numb to it or I think it's dissipated a touch. I don't want to say the foot's completely off the gas. I think it's just cruise control instead of foot on the floor.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not, I was trying not to interrupt your flow,
Yeah.
but I
I
was
was
like,
like,
I'm all like, yes, yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So
I love that analogy. Yes.
I think, I haven't seen a ramp up in it. We've kind of stayed at the stagnant, like we're going to continue to bring these things, but we we saw a flurry in Ohio last year. I haven't, we have a new one on drag bans, but I haven't seen anything specifically targeted at marriage. Now, we do have the Texas case, which I do want to bring up because it's interesting. And it's specifically a Texas judge who is saying my religious freedoms prohibit me from doing LGBTQ marriages. I cannot issue a marriage license. And so I think that is alarming because with the administration we have, there's a lot of movement towards religious freedoms, and I want to say Christian religious freedoms, right? That's really how we're seeing this take shape. And so I think it's incredibly interesting. And I can go down a rabbit hole, but if anyone pursues this religious freedom argument that allows this to happen, I think the counter argument comes up with the Jewish faith and abortion, because the Jewish faith takes the life of the mother much more serious and doesn't have the same definition of when conception happens. And so I think that's a really interesting legal conundrum that we would have is, do these religious liberties trump? If they do, great. Then are we going to apply them to a faith other than Christianity? So that's a long circle of conversation, but that is the Texas judge is probably the most currently scary thing that is attacking marriages.
Yeah. No, I think what you're saying is actually really poignant because it goes back to something we talked about at the beginning, right? Like it was sort of thinking about when the justices may decide to look at a case or if it's the right case or whatever it is. And I think in this particular moment, it's sort of the same thing. It's a litmus test, right? Like, are we going to see traction? in things that are just legal policy based, if you want to say, right? Or are we going to see things that are social moray based, religious freedoms, right? Like, and so if there's traction in religious freedoms, right, you can see people pushing that further. But as you said, right, there becomes then the question, the conundrum of, well, is it religious freedoms on all sides? Or is it religious freedoms for a particular type of identity, right? And so that's something I think is poignant and salient to look at, right? To think about sort of what sort of laws and bills that are pending, and where the root is coming from, right? Is this a
Right.
is this coming from a social aspect or political or legal standing aspect, right? Like that's going to be really critically important, right? Because and that tells us potentially where the bite may come as we see decisions coming out of courts, right? If a court is starting to say, well, we are sticking to the precedent of what's happened here, or we're going to start listening to some of these religious freedom conversations because it seems like we don't have it fully baked up yet, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, which I think could be really interesting because we have so many different religions in the US, right? We don't have a national religion. We have so many different things that have conflicting viewpoints and very um what polarizing things. And so
Things, yeah.
that's where I think that's a you would be hard pressed to get the court to take up those cases, I think, because of the broad reaching implications based on different religions and their position on different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it will, as someone who has converted religions, right, you even in that space, right, you think about how that can be, it's a heavy moment, and touchy place to be in, but the grayness of religious freedoms allows for so much in terms of negativity in relation to challenges of social and personal rights. But we'll see where we go. So,
Yeah.
I think you mentioned this a little bit, and we talked a little bit about this. And I think even in this conversation about religious freedoms and types of cases that may be showing up and popping up, um, I think there's this sort of the shadow of things, right? Like this emergency shadow docket. I call it a shadow docket,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
what's in the shadows, like literally, like it's right, like and
Hmm.
right, not the like the umbrella shadow, but like the what's lurking in your shadows when you're a little kid and you jump. Anyway, sorry, long things.
Yeah.
But like what's there? Like what are these things that are becoming so influential in shaping policy? Right, like they're there. We know they're there. We're talking about them right now, right? But like what is it? Right, as a layperson, right, and I'm not fully lay because I'm so close to sort of this policy work, but as a layperson in
Yeah.
the community, what's up?
Yeah,
What is
so it's called the emergency docket, but I think in common language we've called it the shadow docket because it kind of lives in the shadows.
mm,
You don't have the very public oral arguments, right? Cases that are on the main Supreme Court docket, anyone can tune in and listen to the appellate arguments. And it's really interesting if you've never listened because it's a different way than what you see on, like Law and Order of arguing cases. But then you have the shadow docket or emergency docket that are for things that need to be addressed quickly because they have broad implications. And realistically, the shadow docket is there to kind of like either keep the status quo or not. And what we're seeing on a lot of these things, on a lot of the issues that are coming up, is we're getting way more cases through the shadow docket because there's litigation. I don't know if people know this, but like as soon as Trump took office, like a flurry of litigation occurred based on executive orders. And so we're seeing those start to go through the shadow docket and have been, and that's where we're getting these rulings from, but they're briefed very differently. So to go to the shadow docket, it's a much more abbreviated argument. You have a written argument to the court, the other side has a brief chance to respond, but you're not getting oral arguments. You're not getting into, it's not having been tried at another court. There's not that the full evidence foundation. And so when we do regular SCOTUS appeals, like the request for cert that we originally started talking about, it had a whole trial, right? There was evidence presented, there were emotions, all these things were presented to the court. A court had a decision, and then it proceeded up on appeal. In these shadow dockets, you don't necessarily have the full evidence. You haven't had that full trial. It's this interim decision while they're working through having a full trial. And so the court is making these decisions based on, I mean, arguments presented, but just a very small
sliver?
glimpse, sliver of what's going on because you haven't had the full case argued yet. And so with the passports, where this topic came up, so we had a class action lawsuit filed in Massachusetts, which I think is genius because we had a SCOTUS case say that you can't have district courts, so like our federal trial courts, can't order injunctions for the entire US unless it's a class action. Well, the attorneys for the individuals who were trans and had passport issues had made it a class action before that came out. And so they were able to get a temporary restraining order that was class wide and nationwide. So it was a very brilliant legal maneuver to have that certified as a class before the ruling came out.
All I will say is that I love those Massachusetts people. I mean, I'm not moving there myself, but like, Governor Healy up there doing doing good stuff. Like, I mean, but I mean, I think it's that pragmatism, that thoughtfulness, it's that intentionality to think about how we can leverage the system to ensure that we are getting the things that we need. But just I got excited about it.
No,
Massachusetts
no,
once again.
that's when I saw Massachusetts convert it to a class action, I was like, brilliant, because then you're ensuring that it covers every trans person in the country. Versus the limited, because it's got, I think, 6 or 7 plaintiffs in the case. So instead of 6 or 7 people, it had broad reaching implications. So the plaintiffs, the class action was successful in getting a temporary restraining order. And I think that was in place sometime this summer. I want to say like mid-June, it was in place and allowed any trans individual to get a passport that matched their identity, not necessarily their birth certificate. And so we had that after Trump took office and said you can't do that and got rid of being able to self-select your gender identity. So that happened in February, first day Trump took office, you can't self-select. We had this class action lawsuit and an injunction, a temporary injunction was issued by the Massachusetts District Court that said that's incorrect. We need to allow trans folks to be able to um, self-select their gender
Okay.
identity. And the standard for getting that type of injunction is you have to prove without a whole lot of evidence that you'll be successful on the merits. And so having that injunction issued it was a very good sign for the trans community. Then we had the Justice Department recently take this up on the shadow docket and say, like, we can't do this. I have not read exactly what their arguments were to try and repeal the injunction. And that's what happened recently is the injunction that was allowing trans folks to self-select gender identity for their passports was repealed or revoked. And so now we're back to the executive order that took place in February. The case is still ongoing. And given that there was a successful injunction or temporary injunction, um, it's a good sign for when the case gets decided, but these cases take like 2 years to get decided. And so it'll be unfortunately a very long time
Um,
before trans folks can self-select on their passports again.
mm. So, and thank you. I mean, just the layers, but thank you, right? Because I think there are so many layers and injunctions, and just even the injunction is again, all these things they're slowing the process, right? They're delaying something so that we can again, what's the word? Sort of ensure or shore up our sort of stock, right? To shore up the things that we need to do to make sure that the negative side of this doesn't happen, and the positive side is what we sort of land on. But you and I are closer to some of this stuff than most people, than the common person. How do people stay informed of like things like shadow dockets and emergency dockets or whatever? Like, is there a place where people can look at? I honestly don't know. Like, I don't look anywhere other than what I get the information. It comes to me, so that's how I know what's going on. But like, are there people who like I'm not that tied in? How do I know what's happening?
So I will say, like, Lambda Legal is a wonderful resource for a lot of this. And then I have to see if they still have it up. The National LGBTQ Bar used to have a tracker
Hmm,
on executive orders. I don't know if
okay.
they still have it,
Hmm,
but it was actually really wonderful to be like, what the heck is happening today?
happening. That's a but that's a good thing to consider, right? Like I will say, I've not been. I used to love to go to the White House's website, and I used to look at all of the executive orders and all the things that rolled out. I have not been to that site in a while, right?
Mhm.
But it would be lovely to know, right? Like if we had a little bit of technical difficulty there, it seems that the webinar is live streaming right now. Thank you so much, Leo, for coming back and assisting us as we try to map it out. We've got a couple minutes left to wrap out some questions, and I think one of the things that we were trying to wrap out on um, as we were trying to understand was, where are the other places people can find information about shadow cases or things that are happening. And we were talking about being able to go to the National Gay and Lesbian Legal, I forgot what you call it, the
It's
attorneys.
LGBTQ.
Yes,
It's LGBTQbar.org
thank you.
/programs
Perfect,
/Trump executive order tracker. I know it's
perfect,
a lot, but if you type in some level of those words, you will find it. And it does a wonderful job. It takes every one of his executive orders that is targeted at the LGBTQ community and then tells you every case that's challenging it across the
perfect.
country.
Say the name of the organization for me again so I don't mess it up.
it's it's the LGBTQ plus bar. And it
Okay,
is,
perfect,
yes, it is the national group of attorneys who are
perfect.
LGBTQ and advocate for the community.
Perfect, perfect. So let's go there since I don't like to go to the White House website anymore for numerous reasons, but that's a great place to find out what's going on in the world. So, I think, as we think about sort of what else is happening, we've talked about passports, we've talked a little bit about healthcare, we've got to pay attention to parental recognition and what's happening. We talked a little bit about that. I think as we think about from a national perspective to a local level, are there things that organizations like Stonewall or Equality Ohio or even governments can help in this particular moment? Like, are there things that you might suggest? Right, we don't know all the answers, but are there any sort of high level? I am Allison, and I know some stuff. Let me let me share some wisdom.
I mean, the burning thing is get rid of Ohio's constitutional ban on same-sex marriage. I think that's something we miss because Obergefell came out of Ohio. We are
Mm,
lucky enough in Central Ohio that Jim comes to a lot of events, and so, but we forget there's still a constitutional ban in Ohio on same-sex marriage. So if anything happens at the national level, then Ohio is one of the states where no one
right.
can get married. Yeah, and we go back to draconian, you can't get married.
So in essence, we're saying don't stop fighting for the rights, right? I think that's a reality. Wonderful. So, barring some technical difficulties this evening, I think we had a really great and fruitful conversation that sort of took us on a local to national perspective of the post Kim Davis decision and what we may be preparing for in the future. And I think what I take away from this conversation more so than anything is be thoughtful and pragmatic, right? I think we have an opportunity to think intentionally about the future, to think about sort of how we can protect ourselves from all aspects, right? Not just singularly resting on the notion of marriage or the legalities of government, but to go a little deeper and to look at what contracts and protections we may put into place to ensure that not only in this moment but in the future we are prepared as individuals, but also as those who choose to create families and sustain families as well. So, Allison, I want to thank you so much for the time that you took with us this evening. Again, barring the technical difficulties, I think we had a really
Oh,
great, fruitful conversation. We laughed. I didn't cry. So that's all. That's always a great thing, you
yes, it
know.
is.
And I think as we continue to exist in this moment of heaviness, joy and laughter are going to be important aspects of how we move forward. So I don't know if there's any closing words you wanted to share with folks with Allison, but again, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you all. I think this is a wonderful conversation. The more educated we are as a community, the stronger we are. And so take the opportunity to educate yourself and figure out what are the things that you need to strengthen your bonds with whoever you choose to call family. And I think we will all be better for it.
Wonderful. Well, again, Allison, thank you so much. We'll see you in all of those states, hopefully, doing the great work. And I will say, hopefully, you expand even more, right, to bring the talent, the information, and honestly, the joy that you are giving to people as they protect themselves and their families. So, thank you so much, and have a great evening, everyone.